Harold's Cross, 5 kilometres south of Dublin, Ireland's capital city, is home to Mount Jerome Cemetery. During the 1900s, wealthy families spent small fortunes creating impressive monuments to commemorate their dead and display their wealth. One of the most impressive monuments has housed the remains of Surgeon James William Cusack since 1861. Cusack had a successful surgical practice and was president of the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin. He was surgeon in ordinary to Queen Victoria in Ireland. The Harvey Vault is one of the more expensive tombs. The life-sized sculpture of an Irish wolfhound depicts a distressed dog that was found after its master had drowned. The remains of the faithful dog lie in the tomb along with its master. An occupant of the Gresham Vault was terrified of being buried alive. She had a bell, now missing, mounted on top with a chain running into the vault so that she could ring for help if she woke up in the tomb. Though many monuments are outstanding, most are modest, typically simple headstones. Mount Jerome opened in 1836 and was the third cemetery to open in Dublin within an 8-year period. The other two were Golden Bridge in 1829 and Prospect, now Glasnevin, in 1832. These were launched as non-denominational cemeteries, accepting members of all religious denominations and none. In practice, however, Prospect and Golden Bridge, both established by Daniel O'Connell and the Catholic Cemetery Committee, were the preferred locations for Catholic burials. Mount Jerome, on the other hand, was located in a Protestant neighbourhood of Dublin and was the preferred final resting place for Protestant families. The first Catholic buried in Mount Jerome was in 1920, when grave diggers at Glasnevin Cemetery were on strike. In the middle of the 17th century, the vicar of St Kevin's Parish in Dublin, Reverend Stephen Jerome, established the Mount Jerome Estate. In 1834, the estate was owned by the family of John Keogh, and they sold it to the Dublin General Cemetery Company, which had been established to provide urgently needed burial spaces in the rapidly growing capital city of Dublin. The infant twins of Matthew Pollock, a wealthy Dublin merchant, were the first to be buried in the 26-acre Mount Jerome Cemetery. The cemetery was expanded to 48 acres in 1874. The cemetery houses the remains of many who made notable contributions to Irish history and culture. And the creative arts are particularly well represented. William Carleton was an anthropologist and an author of novels about Irish peasantry. He's best known for his drawings of the stereotypical Irishman. He died in 1869. George Petrie was a prolific scholar. He illustrated Irish travel guidebooks and painted fine watercolour scenes of Ireland. He produced an extensive catalogue of Irish antiquities and local history. He prepared the Petrie collection of the ancient music of Ireland. After an exceptionally productive life, he died in 1866, aged 76. Sir William Wilde, a ear, nose and throat surgeon, wrote about Irish antiquities and his travels across Europe, where he collected historic souvenirs for display in his home at Merrion Square in Dublin. Opposite his old home is a statue of his son, the author Oscar Wilde. Oscar is buried in France and is commemorated on his father's tombstone. Also remembered is Sir William's wife, Lady Jane Wilde, a poet and writer of Irish folk tales who published under the name Speranza. The writings of Carleton, Petrie, the Wilds, and others inspired a renewed interest in traditional Irish literature, art, and music, and several of its key exponents of this Celtic revival rest in Mount Jerome. Born in 1871, John Millington Synge died just 38 years later in 1909. Though he was a member of a wealthy Anglo-Irish family, he wrote mainly about working-class Catholics in rural Ireland. When his play, The Playboy of the Western World, was first staged in the Abbey Theatre in 1907, its negative portrayal of Irish women provoked people to demonstrate outside the theatre. Synge gathered Irish folklore and stories, and his book about the Aran Islands was illustrated by Irish artist Jack Butler Yeats, who also rests in Mount Jerome. Yeats's painting, The Liffey Swim, won silver at the 1924 Olympics. Art, inspired by sport, featured as a medal competition at the Olympic Games from 1910 until 1948. Jack Yeats designed sets for the Abbey Theatre, and 3 of his own plays were also produced there. George Russell published books and painted under the pseudonym A.E. He was a politician and a co-founder of the Abbey Theatre, the National Theatre of Ireland. He painted spiritual beings with whom he claimed he had communicated. He was generous to young writers and was said to have sponsored 3 generations of Irish writers. He died in 1935, aged 68. Joseph Thomas Sheridan Le Fanu wrote fantasy and horror stories and has been described as the father of the English ghost story. One of his stories, Camilla, is a tale of a seductive female vampire who preys on young women. He became a recluse after his wife died, but could be glimpsed occasionally walking in Merrion Square. He died in 1873, aged 59. 4 of Sheridan's novels were adapted and staged in the Gate Theatre in Dublin by Lord and Lady Longford, who founded Longford Productions in 1936. Lord Longford became chairman of the Gate Theatre in 1930, and he used his personal fortune to subsidise the Gate for several years. He died in 1961, and his wife died in 1980. John Kells Ingram, a professor and vice provost in Trinity College, Dublin, is best remembered for his ballad, Who Fears to Speak of 98?
Who fears to speak of 98? Who blushes at the name?
Written in honour of the 1798 rebellion by the United Irishmen. Ingram died in 1907, aged 83. Rebellions against the British administration in Ireland were a feature of Irish history for hundreds of years. Thomas Davis, a celebrated Irish patriot, was a journalist. He also co-founded the Young Ireland organisation that sought to unite Catholics and Protestants in a campaign to achieve Ireland's independence from Britain. A recording of his poem, A Nation Once Again, sung by the Wolfe Tones, was voted the world's favourite song in a global BBC poll in 2002. Davis was 30 when he died in 1845, 3 years before the failed Young Islander Rebellion. A Masonic symbol is one of the many decorations on the tomb of architect and mason Thomas Kirk, who died in 1845. He created the statue of Dublin-born Admiral Horatio Nelson, that once stood on top of a high pillar in the heart of Dublin until it was blown up by a Republican in 1966. Successful businessmen interned in Mount Jerome include Ebenezer Bustard, who emigrated to the USA, where he amassed a vast fortune after setting up a merchandising business and developing a large property portfolio. He married his cousin, who was 14 years younger, and they had 14 children. After inheriting the family estate after his older brother's death, he returned with his family to Donegal, where he acquired 10,000 acres. He established this impressive residence on Aylesbury Road in Dublin and died in 1882. This tomb houses members of the Guinness family, including Arthur Guinness II, who grew the brewery started by his father in St James's Gate, Dublin, into the largest in Ireland, with a thriving export trade. Alex Findlater established a company in 1823 that became one of the largest distributors of food and drink in Ireland. He was noted for his charitable donations, including underwriting much of the cost of building the Presbyterian St Mary's Abbey Church, which is usually referred to as Findlater's Church. James Horton was a corn merchant who, after his wife died, campaigned against slavery and capital punishment. He also joined with Father Matthew, founder of the Pioneer Total Abstinence Association, in advocating for tighter controls on the sale of alcoholic drinks. Many of those who worked for the British government and its Dublin Castle administration are buried in Mount Jerome. For almost 20 years, Sir Maizière Brady was Lord Chancellor, the highest judicial office in the land. As a captain in the Royal Engineers, Thomas Drummond developed the Drummond Light, which he used when carrying out an ordnance survey of Ireland. After he became Under-Secretary of Ireland in 1835, Drummond established the Royal Irish Constabulary, a rural police force. Before he died in 1840, Scottish-born Drummond asked to be buried in Ireland, claiming, "In Ireland, the land of my adoption, I have loved her well and served her faithfully, and lost my life in her service." Bindon Blood Stoney was chief engineer at Dublin Port. He redesigned Carlisle Bridge, now called O'Connell Bridge. He also designed the modern quay walls of the Liffey and invented an underwater diving bell within which workers installed pre-cast concrete blocks below water level. Sir Richard John Griffith prepared the first geological map of Ireland and conducted a property valuation in every town and county in Ireland. He was 94 when he died in 1878. This large, unadorned vault belongs to William Plunkett, Dean of Christ Church Cathedral and Archbishop of Dublin. He is one of the many deceased clerics of the established Church of Ireland buried in this cemetery. William Lecky was one of Ireland's greatest historians. He graduated from Trinity College, Dublin, where this statue stands today. He inherited a private income and could afford to decline the chair of modern history at the University of Oxford. He wrote an 8-volume History of England during the 18th century and received honorary doctoral degrees from Oxford and Cambridge universities. Inscriptions on monuments and headstones reveal many who had military careers, including 74 Commonwealth veterans of the 2 World Wars. Fritz Braes was a German military bandmaster and composer who became the leader of the first Army School of Music in the Irish Free State at the Curragh military camp in Kildare in 1923. He died in 1940. Some cemetery residents are known for their infamous activities. Martin Cahill, nicknamed the General, is believed to have been the head of the gang that stole paintings worth £30 million from Rusborough House in Wicklow. Cahill was assassinated in 1994, reputedly by the Provisional Irish Republican Army. His gravestone has been vandalised several times, and his remains have been relocated to an unmarked grave. Cahill's criminal life was made into a movie. David Byrne was a key member of the Kinahan drug cartel. He was shot dead when gunmen opened fire during a boxing weigh-in at a Dublin hotel in 2016. His murder was the third in the Kinahan-Hutch gangland feud that has claimed at least 11 lives. The cemetery has several communal plots, including 2 for deceased policemen. The Dublin Metropolitan Police maintained law and order in the capital city from 1836 to 1925. The Royal Irish Constabulary, the RIC, which policed most of the rest of Ireland until it was disbanded in 1922, following the establishment of the Irish Free State. This large communal plot contains the remains of 300 Huguenots, French Protestants, who died between 1713 and 1830. Their remains were relocated from other Dublin cemeteries in 1968. The female orphan house was a Protestant-run home for destitute girls. They were trained to be domestic servants. The remains of over 275 children who died while residents of Bethany Home for Unmarried Mothers have been discovered in paupers' graves. The home was one of several notorious mother and baby homes where an unusually high number of babies died, and many mothers were forced to give up their children for adoption. During the 1970s, as the popularity of cremation grew and the number of burials declined, the cemetery's revenues decreased. Its owners ran out of money and had insufficient funds to maintain the cemetery, so its condition deteriorated. By the 1980s, it was overgrown, derelict, and vandalised. An attempt to put the General Cemetery Company into voluntary liquidation led to a debate in the Irish Parliament about the company's legal responsibilities. Fortunately, the cemetery was saved from closure after it was purchased by Massey Undertakers in 1984. However, the condition of the cemetery continued to deteriorate, and by the 1990s it was in a state of serious neglect. Some headstones severely decayed by wind and rain, some damaged by vandals. The future of the cemetery looked bleak, but that's not the end of the story. The fortunes of the cemetery improved after a crematorium was opened in 2000. A columbarium wall and a garden of remembrance were built to house cremated remains. Celebrities cremated here include Irish journalist and author Maeve Binchy, who died in 2012. She published 16 books that achieved global sales of 16 million copies. The profitable crematorium provided funds to re-establish proper maintenance and initiate restorations of buildings and monuments. For more than 185 years, families from Dublin and further afield have disposed of their deceased loved ones in Mount Jerome Cemetery. Here, mourners find solace and peace in a tranquil, park-like setting, and visitors enjoy one of the finest collections of funerary art and architecture in Ireland.